Welcome to the Scandinavian Mind podcast, our weekly show about how technology is changing the creative industries. Today on the program, an update on how EU regulations will affect the fashion industry. A slew of new directives and legislations are coming out of the EU in the coming years that will affect the global textile industry. We will try to provide an overview of these legislations as well as give you the resources where you can find out more. We will also be talking about takeaways from Global Fashion Summit that took place in Copenhagen this week. We'll hear from Mauro Scalia, Director of Sustainable Businesses at EURATEX, who did a much like Keynote at our transformation conference in Helsinki earlier this summer. And we'll provide an overview, or a preview rather, of the upcoming Stockholm edition of Transformation Conference we're so excited about. My name is Konrad Olsson, Editor-in-Chief and founder of Scandinavian Mind. And I'm here with my dear colleagues, our senior editor, Johan Magnusson, and our editor-at-large, Oliver Dahle. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so this EU legislation thing is a big topic right now, not least present at this week's Global Fashion Summit, which we'll talk more about later in this show. It's a big topic which I think everyone in the industry is starting to trying to get their hands around. There's a lot of worry among fashion brands. There are a lot of questions in the air, and that's why we want to be a kind of a resource where you can try to figure out what this will mean for the industry, for brands, for designers, for suppliers, and so forth. It will definitely affect the whole value chain of the fashion industry. And I wanted to start by just plugging that the whole conference from Helsinki, which we talked a lot about this topic, the whole transformation conference from Helsinki is now up on scandinavianmind.com. So for anyone who wants a deeper kind of primer on this issue, go to scandinavianmind.com and look at the on-demand and click at the on-demand link where we'll show you all the videos from the conference. And perhaps the most important one was that from Mauro Scalia. He's the Director of Sustainable Businesses at European Apparel and Textile Federation, EURATEX. He's the lobbyist for the textile industry. He works in Brussels. He has a very in-depth and on-the-ground view of what's happening. Let's just hear a brief clip from Mauro's keynote speech.
What this legislation wants to do is to oblige companies to justify their statements based on scientific data, based on key parameters. It's very ambitious, and not only look at the claim on the product, but in principle, also the claim of the brand would have to be justified. So I no longer can say by 2025 I want to be the best for that, or I want to do this. I need to justify that, which probably means we're going to have way less claims in the near future, because companies will have to think twice, but perhaps more reliable, and then we can trust them.
All right, that was Mauro Scalia, Director of EURATEX in Helsinki earlier this summer. Johan, you actually met Mauro after the conference. What were your impressions when speaking to him, and did you get a grasp of this topic?
Yeah, great speech and a great interview, which we also turned into a so-called Voices online, where we every week we let the industry insiders share their insights and knowledge. So great interview, and great to meet him, and he had a very appreciated keynote. He also set the tone for the entire day, the entire conference. And also, quite a serious tone, of course. And the Transformation Conference is very, it's a serious event, So, it was great to start with him.
All right, I thought we'd take the chance to at least try to give an overview of these legislations. It's impossible for a half-hour podcast show to do it justice, but I wanted to get some things in here for anyone who's new to this. as Mario talked about in his keynote, which you can see online, there are 16 different areas of legislation that is being pushed through the EU right now. And this, it will affect the entire value chain of producing, distributing, selling, and ultimately taking care of the waste of the textile value chain. So, I think Mauro highlighted three things in his speech: the digital product passport, which is going to be a huge thing, where 300 million products that will be sold in EU every year will be required to carry this digital product passport with information about the origins of the materials, where it's being produced, how it's being produced, and so forth. There's also this extended producer responsibility, which puts a whole lot more weight on the brands in terms of where the product will end up ultimately. After they're being sold, after they have been used by the consumer, how can we take care of it better? There's a big article in Aftonbladet this past weeks covering the reverse logistics part of the value chain, where they've been following how products that are being put into recycling bins, ultimately being ended up in landfills in Africa. Incredible reporting that has put a lot of strain on the big fast fashion players, including H&M, of course. Oliver, you've been covering this quite a lot recently. You've been writing about it. How would you describe these EU legislations if you met a fashion brand and tried to explain it to them?
Yeah, like it's very convenient that this was presented during the transformation conference, because this is something that will transform the fundamentals of how the fashion industry are working. Basically, what the European Union wants to do is to change the whole idea of what the fashion industry are doing, how they operate. So it's going to be changed from a model which is very much take and make, a very linear business model. You produce textiles, you do something from the textiles, and then you don't know where it ends up. You throw it away, just ship it to Africa, and clothes end up in landfill. And so what the European Union wants to do is basically to close this loop, to make the fashion industry become a circular industry. And what they are trying or hope to do with all these legislation that is coming is to look into, as you said before, different parts of the supply chain. When we talk about fashion and sustainability, we always mention how the supply chains are so complex. So obviously, if you are going to create a regulation that adheres to these supply chains, it will be very complex regulations as well. So therefore, it's how you look at the reporting, what happens with the waste, the digital product passport, and all these kind of things. But one major change to me is how fashion brands have to become service providers instead of just pushing products. We need to keep our clothes in this circular loop for much longer than we do now. Because consumers today, they are buying t-shirts, they are using it just a couple of times, then they throw it away because, I don't know, maybe it loses the fit, maybe the color is fading, there might be a zipper which is a bit wonky, or things happening with the clothes. And so what the EU regulation are doing is that they are looking into a lot of the design part of how clothes are made. How could you produce clothing that lasts for longer? How are you designing clothes that is either easy to repair, so you could, instead of throwing away your coat, your jacket because the zipper is not really working, how could you then just in an easy way change this zipper and then use your jacket for maybe 2 or 3 or 10 more seasons? So that's one part of it, actually looking into the design part of fashion, how it's created, but also how could fashion brands be part of this prolonging the use of garments. Let's say you go and buy a jacket from a brand. How are they then helping you with repairing it, maybe retaking it, selling it on a secondhand market? How could the brand give you suggestions on where to repair it, how to remake it, and actually prolong the life of this garment so you don't throw it away, which has been a very common practice by brands, consumers, and everyone that somewhat take part of the fashion and clothing industry.
Just to pause there, Oliver, for a second. I think that's what's so fascinating about this this whole project that they're undertaking in the EU is that they really aim to fundamentally change the way we look at clothes, the way we handle clothes, the way we use them, the way we, as you said, repair them and try to prolong the life. These are all buzzwords that has been in the fashion industry for a long time. Brands have been talking about this. There are initiatives, in any fashion store, there are these initiatives of, pre-loved garments or repair and so forth. But, to me, that has been kind of, varnish on a very traditional, industry, a very traditional way of working. What's fascinating about these regulations, if they take it all the way, if they really go through with this and implement all of these initiatives, as I said, there's 16 different legislations that they want to push through. It will fundamentally change the textile industry. And as we heard Mauro talk about from the conference, it will change a lot of brands. It will probably make a lot of brands disappear if they do this. And just going from what you said, being a supplier, a producer, which many brands are pretty much just designing, ordering the production of clothes from a factory, pushing them out into the world, and their responsibility ends there. If they have to take care of the entire value chain, which is when I speak to the brands, they're just scratching their heads and shaking their heads and saying, we don't even know where to start. Becoming a service provider, they don't have the knowledge for this. They don't have the technological maturity for this. So this is where I just wanted to pause and reflect on this. This is where it gets really, really tricky for the industry, I think. And we're going to go into talking about some of the discussions that were in Copenhagen this week. But it's interesting to see how this all is now. The conversation is really starting in the industry. People are waking up to this because these legislations are being decided this summer. So it's very timely to talk about this stuff. One of the things other big part of it is the communication, and maybe we can. I know this was talked about in Copenhagen. You've been covering and following what's been saying there, but this kind of new green claims part of the legislation where brands, it's basically a law that will end greenwashing. But it's much more detailed than that. Any claim that you make about your garments or your clothes or how your production needs to be backed by facts, needs to be backed by data. What's your take on this, Oliver?
Yeah, but like for all three of us here working in fashion and have been doing for a couple of years, we all have seen these claims in different ways. How collections is made out of recycled, whatever it could be, how this brand is reducing their carbon footprint, whatever it could be. It's a lot of numbers, statistics that are just being thrown around without actually being able to check if this is sustainable. What is what are they actually doing? Is this something that is good? It's very hard for the consumer to actually value all these claims that has been going around. So yeah, what will be implemented is how these environmental claims need, as you said, to have scientific proof, and that there will be a shared framework which all brands and companies needs to adhere to. Because, as you said, looking back, there hasn't really been anything, and it has been very much up to anyone to self-regulate and to actually present whatever the brand wants to present. So these claims, environmental claims, need to be actually grounded in something, which is more easily grasped than what it has been.
I spend a lot of time digging into consumer behavior now, and if we look at the modern consumer and the consumer group that will become the next big ones, like Gen Z and such, their major topic when buying stuff, it seems, or will become the major topic, is transparency. While the fashion industry for such a long time has been anything but transparent. So it's a fundamental change that needs to take place, and it needs to go fast. But yeah, most likely these new regulation and other initiatives will fast forward this very much needed transformation.
For sure. And let's get into how the industry is reacting on this. This week, the Global Fashion Summit took place in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's kind of the one of the prime events for discussing the challenges of the fashion industry after transformation of conference, of course. No, jokes aside, this is a much bigger event than transformation conference. It's kind of like a Davos of the fashion industry. It's run by the Global Fashion Agenda, which was previously named, I think, Copenhagen Fashion Agenda or something, but they took away the Copenhagen name. I think they really wanted to make it a global event. Oliver, maybe you can describe this event a little bit further and what some of the topics were this week.
Yeah, so as you said, it really is a huge event. So it was during 2 days in Copenhagen, which basically many of the major fashion leaders gathered to discuss these very important topics that surrounds fashion sustainability. And during these 2 days, there was about 140 speakers, more than 1,000 visitors, and there was talks, panel talks, round tables, spread out over 4 stages. So it's really like I don't know if you could use the word, but like a festival of fashion sustainability. They also have an innovator exhibition in which solution providers are presenting their solutions and how to tackle these problems with new ideas, new innovations. So yeah, it's really an event which takes these questions very holistically. But so what are they saying then? First of all, the European Fashion Alliance was present and was having a talk, and to having a segue from the EU regulation we were talking about, the European Fashion Alliance is working very hard with those at the moment. And to give a brief introduction, what they are doing is that EFA, the alliance, is it's consisting of all the European fashion councils, organizations. It has representatives from fashion weeks, which then represent their designers in each country. So they are basically being the middleman, being the connection between the politicians and the fashion designers. I know that the Alliance had a meeting with the European Union not very long ago, just to discuss these regulations that are coming. And they now also have a survey in which they are asking the fashion industry what they need, what they want out of this, of the regulations. And so these regulations are not just coming out of the EU, out of the blue, and they are being discussed with the industry itself. And it was during this talk with the European Fashion Alliance that Carlo Capasa, which represents the Italian Fashion Council, Camera Nazionale della Moda, that he mentioned, like, that there are pitfalls in these regulations that are coming. I'm not 100% sure about this regulation, how it's formed, but in general, it is that by 2030, a majority of collections need to be produced by recycled fabrics, which, when you say it like that, sounds great. But what Mr. Capasa then brought up is that this is a regulation that won't be able to apply to biodegradable fabrics. For example, wool, silk, and fabrics that actually are made of natural materials, because you aren't able to recycle these type of fabrics in the same extent, such as cotton, polyester, or whatever it could be. And so here, the fashion industry are playing a quite vital role in being a player to actually give input and what the regulations are going to be, how they are going to be formed.
This actually makes me kind of happy to hear, because you know, a lot of the issues up until now has been, or a lot of the talk up until now has been, that the fashion industry is not really connected to the EU. Compared to other industries, there are a staggeringly low amount of lobbyists in Brussels, for instance. And you know, lobbyists, we can think of that as something very negative, and why should we have lobbyists? But it's actually the lobbyists that, you know, can speak for an industry and, you know, negotiate and talk to and provide insights to the lawmakers. And that's, you know, one of the reasons, one of the consequences of having an industry that's been so, you know, unregulated for such a long time, you know, compared to the auto industry, or, you know, pharmaceutical, or any other industry that's been very, very tightly regulated. There hasn't been that dialogue, and it's great to hear that it's actually starting to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And what's really beautiful about the European Fashion Alliance is that all, or more or less all of the fashion councils and organizations across Europe are represented. During this talk, I mentioned Carlo Capasa from the Italian Fashion Council, but there was also Susanna Bobikova that represented the Slovak Fashion Council. And the Slovakian fashion scene, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't heard so much about it. But they are still being represented here, and they have a voice to actually have a saying in being have a saying to the regulation that is coming.
There's obviously a ton more to dig into, and this was our attempt to, ahead of summer, give a little bit of an update on what's happening on the EU legislations for the fashion industry. Again, the entire transformation conference from Helsinki is now up on scandinavianmind.com. I highly recommend go and watch those talks and panels. Not least the Mauro Scalia one from EURATEX gave a great overview. If you want to learn more about this, if you want to hear us talk more about it, we have the Stockholm edition of Transformation Conference coming up on August 31st, the last of August, at during Nordic Fabric Fair at the Stockholm Fashion District. We're doing this again with our partners Business Finland and Helsinki partners, as well as Stockholm Fashion District. And I'm happy to say that Mauro Scalia will come back to give his update. I'm sure there has been a lot happening since the end of May, beginning of June, when we heard him talk the last time, and the end of August, because during summer, a lot of these regulations are going to be pushed through. We will also have a slew of great other speakers. We have a series of innovation companies coming from Finland, Nordic bioproducts, which we featured in Scandinavian Mind issue 4, recycling company Rester. Recycling is a huge issue. We're also going to dive into the notion of digital product passport and what that means. We also have some of the leading sustainability directors, managers, professionals from the fashion industry, namely Jessica Cederberg-Woodmar from Gant and Sandra Roos from Kappahl, as well as a group of leading investors in the space. So lots to take in. I encourage you all to have a look at that. Follow our newsletter. Visit scandinavianmind.com/newsletter to get the invite to that event. Again, it's August 31st during Nordic Fabric Fair in Stockholm. And if you want to read up on this stuff, go to scandinavianmind.com and watch this Helsinki edition of the conference. I'd like to thank my colleagues Oliver and Johan, and just to close this out, this will be the last podcast for this season. We're going to do like a traditional Swedish industry vacation in July, and close the podcast for a few weeks. But Scandinavian Mind still will exist, not least our newly launched Beauty Innovation Insights newsletter, which Johan, I know you are working quite hard on. We just released our second letter. You can sign up for this online, of course. And during summer, we do an early bird free access to this newsletter ahead of its paid edition that comes out after summer. Johan, give us an insight on what we have in the Insights newsletter this week and in the weeks to come.
This last edition, the second one, was about how to expand your beauty business in the US, given quite a challenging retail landscape, where certain retailers they implement their own regulation. We will have new regulation coming in the US early next year, but for now, it's the retailers who can make their own lists. So you need to adapt to that certain list in order to be able to sell. Similar to what we will most likely see in the EU, that you need to meet certain standards in order to sell your product.
All right, wonderful. Again, visit scandinavianmind.com/beauty innovation if you want to sign up to our new Insights newsletter. There are a bunch of interesting content and also events coming out of that project later this year. All right, Johan, Oliver, thank you so much for doing this today, and enjoy the summer, guys.